evening and welcome to the Vegas PBS debate for Congressional District 3. I'm Steve Sebelius.
And I'm Elizabeth Thompson. Tonight's debate is being held in front of a studio audience. We'll be posing questions to the Democratic and Republican candidates for Congressional District 3, along with opening and closing statements.
The order of those statements and the first question has been determined by a coin toss. Here are tonight's candidates.
They are Democratic candidate Aaron Bilbray and Republican candidate and Congressman Joe Heck.
Aaron Bilbray, you have the first opening statement.
Thank you very much, Vegas PBS, Elizabeth and Steve, for having me here today. I'm Aaron Bilbray, and I'm running for Congress. I think all of us in this room can agree on one thing, and that's that Congress is broken and it needs to be fixed. I'm a third-generation Nevadan. I'm a small business owner. I've created several community problem-solving nonprofits, including the only completely free pediatric clinic in the state. And I've done this all successfully without government grants or government funding. This type of work has put me directly in sync with the beliefs of this community. For instance, I believe that Social Security is sacred and that we must honor our commitment to seniors. Joe Heck has said that it should be privatized and put in the hands of Wall Street gamblers. My first piece of legislation would make it illegal to cut the benefits of veterans. Joe Heck has repeatedly voted for those cuts. I believe in equal pay for equal work, and Joe feels that his son should get paid more than my daughters. I also have worked for decades to make sure that women and children have access to health care. Joe has voted to cut Planned Parenthood and would even criminalize abortion in cases of rape or incest. I also am going to fight for a middle-class economy. Joe has voted repeatedly to shut the government down. This costs Southern Nevada $500,000 a day. And he did this while at the same time voting to give tax breaks to corporations that move jobs overseas. Congress needs someone like me who will do what they say here in Nevada and do the same thing in Washington, D.C., not like Joe, who says one thing in Nevada and votes a different way inside the Beltway.
Thank you. And Mr. Heck, now your opening statement.
Well, good evening, and I'd like to thank Vegas PBS for hosting us this evening and all of you for tuning in. Look, our nation continues to face serious challenges, from a sluggish economic recovery to questions about health care to our national security, among others. And that's why it's important that your member of Congress has real-world experience to address those difficult issues. As a small business owner, I've created jobs and have made a payroll, and like many businesses throughout Nevada, know what it's like to suffer through the Great Recession while making sure our employees were fully paid and had all their benefits. I've worked in hospital emergency departments for over 25 years on the front lines of medicine and know what does and doesn't work in our healthcare system. And I've been honored to wear a military uniform for over 23 years. Privileged to command, served overseas. I know what it takes to keep our nation safe, to protect our men and women in uniform, and to care for their families, our veterans, and survivors. But it's about more than just experience. You have to come up with meaningful solutions that'll have a positive impact on the lives of the people you represent. And that's why some of the legislation that I've introduced would decrease veterans' homelessness, stamp out human trafficking, create jobs through economic redevelopment in Henderson, boost our economy through international travel and tourism, protect our career and technical education funding, and preserve seniors' choices in Medicare. But it's about more than just solutions, it's about getting results. And that means reaching across the aisle and working with the other side and with the Senate to get things done. I've had 6 bills passed through the House of Representatives with a combined total of only 3 no votes. 3 of those bills have been passed by the Senate and signed into law by the President, and the other 3 are pending Senate action upon their return. But there is still much work yet to be done. And I would like to use my approach of proven experience, meaningful solutions, and tangible results to continue serving the people of Nevada's 3rd District. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, sir. And now we will move to our questions.
Yes, and our first question category tonight is foreign policy, and the first question is for you, Ms. Bilbray. Back on September 17th, the U.S. House of Representatives voted on President Obama's military plan in the Middle East. Your opponent voted against it, as did Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus, while Democratic Congressman Horsford voted in favor. Which way would you have voted and why?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to make sure that everyone understands that as not being a member of Congress, I don't have the information that a member of Congress would have. So it's hard to make a decision like that with the absence of data. However, I have been very concerned about what has been going on with Syria since we first saw those children that were gassed, which is in direct violation of the Geneva Convention. And this doesn't just matter for the Middle East, but this matters for all foreign policy for the future. So I would go in the direction of we needed to do something, we needed to have airstrikes, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what rebels we're talking about arming. Are we talking about the Kurds? Because if that's the case, that's one thing. They have been our greatest allies, but it has not been clear on who that we are talking about arming, and I need a little more information to be able to make a decision like that.
Mr. Heck, your response, same question.
Well, certainly as my vote clearly shows, I did not support arming what the president called moderate Syrian rebels. We did know what rebels he wanted to arm. It was the moderate Syrian rebels. We were already arming the Kurds. And the issue is that we have no ability to know who those Syrian rebels are, whether or not they will take the weapons that we give them and then use them against us. They have no command and control, no leadership. They're not a unified fighting force. And so I felt without having U.S. advisors in place to watch, train, and accompany them, that we would be making a grave mistake in turning over weapons to an unvetted group that ultimately and someday could be fighting against us.
Ms. Bilbray, we have an opportunity to respond.
Sure, and I think first and foremost, yes, Representative Heck has been given more information than I have, and I am only have access to the newspaper when it comes to the rebels that we're arming. But I want to make it very clear as well that I have worked for an international aid organization called Ashoka, and I too have been granted top secret clearance from the United States government. So when I'm given materials, you can rest assured that I will be able to analyze those and make common sense decisions that will keep American families safe.
Thank you. All right, our next question for Mr. Heck. Do you think the group ISIS represents a threat to the U.S. homeland? And what should be done to combat ISIS? And could you ever envision a scenario where U.S. troops are once again in Iraq en masse?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Steve. First, I prefer to call them ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, because I think it truly shows what their ultimate intention is, which is not to just concentrate on Iraq and Syria, but to rebuild a caliphate stretching from southern Turkey through the Middle East and into northern Africa. And I think it's critically important that the United States lead in this fight against trying to degrade and destroy ISIL. We want to fight them over there, not over here. And I think if the situation in the Middle East was to deteriorate further, and should our allies such as Jordan or Israel come under a threat of attack, that we may very well have to put boots on the ground to ensure that they remain a sovereign nation.
Thank you, Ms. Bilbray.
Yes, I mean, ISIS is a serious threat to our safety. We have all seen that. And terrorism is, something that we all are concerned about. On 9/11, I was just blocks from the Pentagon. I heard the plane overhead. I immediately went to the park where the Pentagon was evacuated to. My husband, who's here in the audience, who's a medical doctor, went to the medical triage for 10 hours. I've seen terrorism in the homeland. I've seen what it is. I know that we need to fight it. We need to make sure that we are keeping American families safe. And if I would be very reluctant, though, to put boots on the ground unless it is absolutely necessary. I don't feel that we have the resources to do so. And I believe that after a decade of war, we didn't have the resources for that, and we don't have the resources for our veterans as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Heck. Rebuttal?
Well, again, I think that once our most important allies in the region, such as Israel or Jordan, would come under threat, that we'd have to be committed. We can't keep drawing red lines and then have them crossed and back away. The United States needs to lead. In the absence of U.S. leadership, a vacuum is created, and it's that vacuum that allows these groups to grab hold of the situation and wreak havoc throughout a region and pose a threat to our nation. Like my opponent, I was also involved with the response to 9/11, having served at Ground Zero while this pile was still smoldering, providing medical support and searching for survivors. And so I've seen, having grown up in New York, the devastation of the Twin Towers falling, understand that it's much better to fight them over there than over here. And we will always have the resources necessary to protect this homeland. We always have. We always will.
Thank you. Our next question from Ms. Bilbray. In the run-up to the Iraq War, we were told there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We now know that that is not true. Members of Congress, though, from both parties voted overwhelmingly for the use of force in Iraq based on those statements from administration officials. How do you think we can prevent a situation like that from ever occurring again?
Sure, and I think, Steve, that we've talked about this before, that members of Congress were not given good information, and they did make decisions that necessarily were not, they weren't in the best interest of the American public. I would say, first and foremost, members of the Intelligence Committee have a responsibility to notify their fellow members of Congress of what is going on. Members of Congress don't actually always get that information. And in fact, I'm not even sure that their meetings are necessarily always even put on the docket. So I think that is first and foremost, that members of Congress are briefed on what is going on and are not denied information.
Well, thank you. Mr. Hack, your response.
Well, certainly I think that part of the issue was some problems within our intelligence community at the time that that information was gathered. And as the 9/11 Commission report showed, that we need greater information sharing and working across those cylinders of excellence or silos to make sure that information was shared with all the intelligence players. And so we've taken steps to try to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But the information that was given was considered the best information at the time, and it was corroborated by some of our allied intelligence services. Now, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I can tell you that information, when necessary, is provided to the other members of Congress. In fact, we hold top secret briefings for all members of Congress. And all of our meetings are published. They are noticed when we're going to hold meetings. But for the purposes of safeguarding sources and methods, not all members of Congress are given all of that information. It's kept down to a very narrow group. But information like this, about making decisions about when to go to war, would be shared with all members of Congress.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bilbray, a rebuttal?
I disagree, actually, Joe, because I feel that what happened with NSA and with the monitoring of law-abiding citizens' computers and phones, I don't feel the Intelligence Committee shared with fellow members of Congress, and I do even believe that you said that they needed to stop acting like babies when they weren't given that information. If you were elected, if you were in the House of Representatives, you should be given that information. You are there to represent the people and make the best decisions.
Okay, our next question is for Mr. Hack. We're going to turn now a little closer to home. One of the most important issues facing us here in Southern Nevada, on which nearly everyone in the state agrees, is the building of the newly designated Interstate 11. What will you do, what can you do to ensure Nevada, number one, gets money for the project, and number two, is there any way we can shorten the estimated 20-year time horizon for completion of that project?
Yes, well, certainly, when the idea of I-11 was first started, myself and Representative Paul Gosar out of Arizona were the two members that made sure that the designation of I-11 were kept in the transportation bill that ultimately passed in the 112th Congress that started the process. Subsequently, we have started an I-11 caucus made up of members from both sides of the aisle in both Nevada and Arizona to work cooperatively to try to make sure that we move this project forward. Some of the things that we are working on is expedited permitting and processing, going through the NEPA or environmental impact surveys that are necessary, looking at how we would provide the funding to start off that project. As you probably know, the first piece of I-11 is actually the Boulder City bypass that is funded through state and local dollars. Ultimately, we will need to grow that to connect down to Phoenix and ultimately up through the rest of Nevada. And then the final goal is to have a Canamex corridor to bring commerce through the western United States. As a member of Congress working through the I-11 caucus, I've been involved with trying to make sure that we can streamline the permitting process and provide the available funds necessary to expedite this important project.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbray.
Sure, I certainly support I-11 as well. It's something that we need for our economy. It's going to help tourism and it's going to help commerce. I think the biggest issue is that we can't get a Congress that will authorize transportation funding for more than a 6-month extension. Congress, when they used to work together in a bipartisan fashion, would authorize transportation bills from 3 to 5 years. This gave communities, this gave people time to be able to plan, and we have a dysfunctional Congress that is, if it continues on, it's not going to happen because you cannot run things in 6-month increments.
Mr. Hack?
Well, the last transportation bill lasted for longer than 6 months. And the issues become, how do we continue to fund these important infrastructure projects? Right now, the federal tax highway dollars do not equal the total number of dollars necessary to fund the projects that are currently on the books. And so some of the things that we've looked at is how do we change the funding mechanism? I'm co-sponsor of a piece of legislation by John Delaney, Democrat out of Maryland, that would create an infrastructure bank where private entities would be able to repatriate dollars from overseas tax-free if they invested them in infrastructure bonds, which creates a public-private partnership at no cost to the federal taxpayer to build these projects.
That's your time. Thank you. Next question is for Ms. Bilbray. You have said the national minimum wage should be raised to $15 per hour, which is more than twice the current rate. While many Democrats and some nonpartisans, and I suppose even a few Republicans, do support a higher minimum wage, far fewer think the rate should double. Aren't you concerned at all that such a large, immediate increase could force layoffs for small or medium-sized businesses, which in turn could affect the economy, not just here in Nevada, but across the nation?
Well, we certainly haven't seen that happen in Washington state. And we know that a middle-class economy supports everyone. I don't know if you know this, Elizabeth, but right now, about 1/3 of American families are on the brink of poverty. That means they are one car accident, one health issue away from losing everything. They don't have money in the bank. They don't have savings. They're barely getting by. I know those families here in Southern Nevada. I know these families that are struggling to keep food on the table and to keep the power bills on. And we need to increase minimum wage. If you go look in our own district, there's a McDonald's at Eastern and Sunset. Every employee there is a woman that is my age or older. We cannot expect people to be working 40 hours a week and making $15,000 a year and get by and be able to support their families. So yes, this is something that we need to do, and it will help our economy, and it will create jobs, and it will make sure that people have a quality of life.
Mr. Heck, your response?
Sure. Well, when you look at the working age population between 18 and 64, about 3% of them that work full-time live in poverty. About 17% of them are working part-time, and about 33% are unemployed. So doubling the minimum wage is not going to help those, that 50%, that are working part-time or unemployed. What they need is a job, and they need a full-time job. And what they need is the opportunity to get into an entry-level job and learn the skills that will help them propel to a higher-paying job in full-time employment. And so doubling the minimum wage would most certainly result in decreased opportunity for those that need the help the most. But for those that make up that 3% that are living in poverty, like those workers at the McDonald's at Eastern and Sunset, we should be targeting the help to those individuals through an expanded earned income tax credit that incentivizes work and targets the help to those individuals that need the help the most, while not taking away opportunity from those who are trying to break into the workforce and create a better economy and a better life for their families.
Ms. Bilbray, you'll get the last word on this topic.
Well, to quote Ronald Reagan, there you go again, Joe. This is another idea that is going to help the wealthiest of the wealthy while not helping the middle-class families that really need it the most. We've seen it, as I mentioned before, in Washington State, that increasing the minimum wage does not hurt the economy. In fact, it helps it. We need to make sure that 1/3 of these American families get out of this brink of poverty. So I disagree with you completely, and I don't feel that you have the statistics to prove that.
All right, our next question, we'll turn to the subject of immigration. You didn't see that one coming. House Speaker John Boehner, who you voted for, has consistently refused to bring immigration legislation to the floor. Do you think he's wrong about that?
I do, and I've publicly said that. We have passed 3, 4, 5 different pieces of legislation regarding immigration out of House committees. One of them, out of the House Homeland Security Committee, passed with a unanimous bipartisan vote. Those pieces of legislation should be coming to the House floor for action. This is an issue that must be addressed. And I agree with the approach that the House wants to take, which is a deliberative step-by-step approach addressing each part of the immigration issue. We do not want another 1,200-page bill that's going to try to address immigration in one fell swoop, because then we'll have the same thing like we had with the healthcare law, where we'll have to pass it to find out what's in it. It's better to have a deliberative process where each piece of the immigration program is evaluated unto itself and then incorporated into an overall reform process that will allow this country to have an immigration system that works for America.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbray?
Yes. I see these families, I'm friends with these families that are suffering from the fact that we can't get a Congress that will pass comprehensive immigration reform. I see them in the clinic, I see them in the soccer field. They're friends with my daughters here in Clark County. And I think it's irresponsible that Congress is on recess and not addressing this issue. And I want to say this is another example of Joe saying one thing in Nevada and doing something else in Washington, D.C. The only votes that you've made on this is to deport Dreamers. There is a discharge petition that is there in Congress that you could vote for. The votes are there for comprehensive immigration reform, and you have not done it. And in fact, when Speaker Boehner came here to do a fundraiser for you at the Las Vegas Country Club, you were asked, did you talk to him about comprehensive immigration reform? And you told a reporter, no, I didn't have enough time. Well, I think for these families, you should have made the time.
Mr. Heck, your rebuttal.
Yeah, well, You know, Aaron, you might be entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. In fact, I have voted to allow Dreamers to stay in this country in the most recent DACA vote. And I've been on record, in fact, have tried to draft legislation which included the activist community to try to have Dreamers have an opportunity to stay in this country. And after they provided their input and helped me draft the bill, they decided they didn't want to support it and backed out for political reasons. When we start talking about politics over policy, that's when people will suffer. And that's what's going on with this immigration issue. We need to move past the politics, concentrate on the policy, and help these people.
Our next question for Ms. Bilbray. You've called on Mr. Heck to do more to get comprehensive immigration reform passed. He's come out for a pathway to citizenship for a version of the DREAM Act, the votes he just mentioned. He's even criticized his own leadership publicly for its failure to bring the issue to the House floor. What more do you think he ought to do?
Well, as I mentioned before, he says one thing in Las Vegas, in Henderson, and he does something entirely different in Washington, D.C. You know, he continues, Dreamers came to protest at his office and he had them arrested. I think just even having the conversation with Speaker Boehner, as I mentioned before, when he was at the Las Vegas Country Club, would have been a first step. I think that your inaction is irresponsible. And I think you should call on your leadership to go back to Washington, D.C. and do your job. Congress is the only profession that I know of that when you don't show up for work, you don't get fired.
Mr. Heck, anything more you could have done, you think?
Well, as has been covered widely in the media here locally, I have been public in my calls to the leadership to bring immigration reform votes to the floor. I don't bring it up every time I am with the Speaker, but I do it when we have the opportunity to discuss this issue. And as for the Dreamers that showed up at my office and were arrested, I know that you want to play this up because it's part of the overall approach of the Democratic Party. That was a planned protest where they called the police department to say they were going to show up and that they were expecting to be arrested. And they were not arrested, they were cited after they tried to storm our office and would not leave when requested. We cannot accommodate 50 people in our office at one time. We tried talking to them in the hallways. I wasn't there at the time, but Metro was right around the corner because the protesters themselves said that they were going to be there and wanted Metro to respond. So again, I believe we need immigration reform. I have been vocal in that. I've tried to draft legislation to help that. I have talked to leadership about it. I will continue to do so. There are not enough votes in the House to pass the Senate bill or the House version of that Senate bill at this point in time, and that's why we need to go to the approach that I've talked about previously, which is individual bills addressing each part of the immigration question.
Ms. Bilbray, your rebuttal?
Yes, that's not correct. There are the votes in the House. If we can get the discharge petition out, there are the votes. Your leadership knows that there's the votes, and that's what should be going on. We need to do this for these families. I see these kids every day that are suffering. My own eldest daughter has asked me about her best friend. What is going to happen to her family if we don't get comprehensive immigration reform? This is not a Latino issue, an Asian Pacific Islander issue. This is a community issue, and as parents, we should be doing something about this immediately.
Thank you.
All right, our next question is for Mr. Heck. On the same topic, but in a broader sense, I'm curious, what one thing more than anything else has either influenced or changed your thinking on immigration policy? Just say, since you've been in office or in the last few years, as we know, demographics are changing in Nevada and across the country, and public opinion on this has shifted back and forth a number of times. Have you significantly changed your approach to immigration reform in any way, and why?
Well, no. I mean, the approach that I have now and the positions I have now are the positions I've always had. I'm the grandson of Italian immigrants. I know that it's immigrants that made this nation great. And I know that there are many folks who want to come here and have an opportunity to experience the American dream. And we need to have an immigration system that works for America, that allows those who want to come here and be an active part of our community, an active part of our economy, to come and have that chance at success. And so the positions I have today are the same positions I had when I first ran. I believe that we need to secure our borders, north, south, and ports of entry as the first step so that we can have internal security. You know, 40% of those here in an undocumented status came on a visa, came here legally and just overstayed that visa. We need to address those issues. We need to have mandatory E-Verify so that only those present legally and able to hold a job get a job and decrease some of the incentives. We need to work on family reunification. We need to address the issue with the Dreamers, those children that know no other country but this one, to give them an opportunity at a life here in the country that they know and love. And ultimately, we have to address the question about what to do with the roughly 12 million undocumented immigrants that are currently in this country. Those are the things I talked about on the campaign in 2010, and those are the things I continue to talk about today.
Ms. Bilbray, what about you? What most informs or influences your opinions and positions on this issue?
Certainly. So, you know, I am a third generation Southern Nevadan, and I've seen the community change over the years. And I know these families, I see their suffering. I think that not taking action is completely irresponsible. The comprehensive immigration bill that had bipartisan support in the United States Senate addresses border security. We should be passing that bill and moving forward. We also know this, that the Congressional Budget Office has said that if we pass comprehensive immigration reform, it will save us $1 trillion over the next 2 decades. It's irresponsible not to act. We need to do something, and the time is now.
Mr. Heck?
You know, the problem with the Senate bill and its border security provisions is that it throws $47 billion at the border with no strategy and no funding source. Just another $47 billion added to our deficit. And so what the House has done is actually come up with a strategy, a funding mechanism to provide real border security. In addition, I think that the issue regarding the Senate bill is that it contains many things that have nothing to do with immigration reform. And as for that bill passing through the House, I will tell you that as a member of the House, there are not 218 votes, because if there were, there would be 218 signatures on the discharge petition. But that's how many signatures it takes on a discharge petition to bring the bill to a floor for a vote.
All right, thank you. Next question from Ms. Bilbray. House Republicans have tried to repeal all or part of the Affordable Care Act numerous times. What will be your approach if elected towards the ACA in the new Congress, whatever its makeup may be? What improvements specifically or changes, if any, do you think need to be made to that law?
Sure, absolutely. You know, my husband and I owned a primary pediatric practice. We certainly saw day to day how insurance companies were controlling medicine, or even how I would put 20 claims in a FedEx envelope, send it to an insurance company, and they somehow would lose 5 of them. This was not the way to do medicine. The Affordable Care Act has sweeping reform that needed to be done. Yes, there are problems. Absolutely. And as I like to say, if there's a crack in the wall in your house, you plaster the crack, you don't burn down the entire house, like Joe Heck and the Republican Congress has tried to do over and over again. You know, there are things in that bill that should be changed. For instance, we should be able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. And I know Joe is going to talk about his own version of the Affordable Care Act, which cherry picks all the great things that the HHS has put forward and then puts some pretty bad things in there too, like the ability for, if you have a bad doctor, you can't sue them.
Your response, Mr. Heck?
Sure. Well, as I said before, there are things in the health care law that are required and that we should keep, and those include the consumer protections for health insurance. No one should be kicked off their policy the day after they get sick or because they've turned 65 and the insurance company thinks now they're too old and too much of a risk. There should be no lifetime cap so that when you need that insurance the most, it's no longer there. And those things are important. Unfortunately, those things only take up about the first 50 pages of a 2,000-page bill. You know, lost claims also happen with Medicaid and Medicare, not just with private insurance companies. What we need to do is incentivize people to want to get insurance, not penalize them for not having insurance. Remember that the goal of the health care law was to provide insurance to the 15% of Americans that did not have insurance. So that means roughly 85% of Americans did have some type of health care insurance, most of whom were happy with the policy that they had. As we've seen, those people are now losing their policies. We have nowhere come close to insuring the 15%. We've cost $1.8 trillion in trying to accomplish this. And so let's get back to patient-centered solutions that don't put the government between the patient and the doctor, and we can do this in a much more affordable and effective way.
Ms. Bilbray, is that a valid fix? Do you agree with that? Or if there is a fix that's needed, what would it be?
I think that Joe and myself come at this from very different angles. I think it's the difference between having a primary care practice and being an emergency room doctor. I see the Affordable Care Act as helping families, of helping women, helping children. We needed that sweeping legislation to make sure that people had access to affordable care, and I just think we are looking at things from very different approaches.
All right, our next question for Mr. Heck. You voted along with the Republican caucus to file a lawsuit against President Obama for delaying a provision of the Affordable Care Act, the mandate for business to provide insurance. Do you still think that was the right thing to do, given the fact that even if you're successful in this lawsuit, the likely result would be an order from a court for the president to implement that part of the Affordable Care Act, which the caucus has voted to repeal?
Sure. Look, this lawsuit is really not about the Affordable Care Act. It's about the president's usurping Congress and unilaterally changing laws that he himself has signed into law. And so the idea of using the Affordable Care Act was the place to go because it had the most egregious pieces where the president has totally bypassed Congress. This is about the separation of powers and what the responsibility is of the executive branch versus the legislative branch. The president cannot unilaterally change a law that he himself has signed. Now, the president has issued executive orders in a way that's not been done before, in that they've been used to go around Congress, as opposed to just giving executive direction to his cabinet level agencies, which is the primary intent of executive orders. So this lawsuit is not just for this president, it's about future presidents as well, to say there is a defined role in the Constitution between your job and the job of the Congress, and we want to make sure that that's codified, and so that when the Congress passes a law, the executive branch executes the law.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbray, your thoughts on that lawsuit?
I think this is another example of a broken Congress that needs to be fixed. It's another example of Congress having temper tantrums when they don't get their way. You know, when I was a kid growing up here in Nevada, I come from a Democratic family, and I remember when President Reagan came to visit Nevada. This was the days before the early caucus, when we didn't have president and presidential contenders coming every month. This was such a great honor that our president, Ronald Reagan, was coming to Nevada, and my family had me out there with our American flags, and we were waving them because he was the president of the United States. And I think we need to go back to the days where we respect the office and understand that when you win, you get to make decisions, and Congress needs to work with our presidents and our leaders.
Mr. Heck, your rebuttal is temper tantrum or no?
Oh, look, bipartisanship works both ways. As I've said, the bills that I've passed have all been bipartisan. 6 bills passed, only 3 no votes, a lot of bipartisan support. The fact is, the president is not engaged with Congress. In fact, even the Democrats in Congress are starting to complain about the president disengaging. And so again, the issue is not specifically about this president. It's not specifically about Obamacare. It's about the delineation between the powers invested in the presidency and the Congress as elucidated in our Constitution.
Okay, thank you. Our next question for Ms. Bilbray. Your opponent is a physician. As you mentioned, you're married to a physician. Both of you know, I imagine, the importance of maintaining good, high reimbursement rates in order to maintain access to health care. What specifically do you think can be done to keep those rates high and to stop them from being the first thing that Congress cuts every time that they need to find money?
No, I agree. And I know this has been a concern of the medical community, and I certainly have heard this quite a bit about the reimbursement cuts. And this does have to be a priority. And it needs to, you know, one of the things that I like about the Affordable Care Act is that it does help reimbursement rates of primary care physicians. But I agree with Medicare. We need to make sure that those reimbursement rates stay at a significant level. I don't feel that Congress has addressed this issue. They keep putting a Band-Aid on this issue instead of putting forward legislation that will help our doctors.
Obviously, the sustainable growth rate, which is the formula that you're referring to, is critical to be replaced. In fact, I, along with Allison Schwartz, a Democrat congresswoman from outside Philadelphia, introduced the first bill to replace the sustainable growth rate with a formula that would maintain reimbursement levels at a level that would allow physicians to continue to participate in Medicare. Subsequently, this year, we reintroduced the bill again, and it was the beginnings of a conversation where both sides of the aisle and both houses of Congress have agreed on the policy provisions to repeal the SGR and replace it with a more sustainable formula going forward. We're hopeful that we can get that done before the end of this year. This has been a problem that's gone on since the late 1990s. This year alone, if there was no temporary fix, there would be a 28% cut to physicians' Medicare reimbursements. Many physicians would stop participating in Medicare, and seniors would lose access to the doctors that they know, and new people coming into Medicare would not be able to find a doctor. This is an area that I have worked on extremely hard over the last 4 years and will continue to do so, and hope to see this passed before the end of this calendar year.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbray, do you support that approach, Congressman?
Well, I want to say I think this is another example of actually saying things back in Southern Nevada and not really doing things in Washington, D.C. It's wonderful that you co-sponsored legislation with Congresswoman Schwartz of Pennsylvania, but it has not gone anywhere, and we're not seeing anything happen because we have a Congress that doesn't show up to work, doesn't do their job, and we need to start electing people that will show up and make sure that things happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question for Mr. Hack. Your opponent mentioned in comments earlier tonight that she objected to the withholding of information either by the Intelligence Committee or the intelligence community from Congress as a whole. I assume, or I think I've heard you say in the past, that you don't see things quite that way. Why is she wrong on that issue? Why shouldn't Congress be as informed as anyone else in the administration on these issues?
I'd like to answer that question, but first I want to go back to SGR for a minute, because the SGR bill did pass through the House. It is floundering in the Senate, as are 400 other bills that have been passed out of the House. Going back to the issue regarding the intelligence community. Look, the issue behind the Intelligence Committee and its role is to make sure that we safeguard the sources and methods that we use to collect the intelligence that keeps this nation safe. And to do that, that information is compartmentalized. My opponent said she has a top secret clearance. She would know this if she had a top secret clearance. Not all because you have a clearance doesn't mean you have the right to know. You have to have a need to know that information. And so, in order to protect our assets and how we get the intelligence that we use to keep this nation safe, that information is ratcheted down to the intelligence community, bipartisan committee, smallest committee in the House. However, when there are issues of critical importance, like going off to war, then the entire House is read into that information through top secret hearings, and they would have all the information they need to make an informed decision. In addition, they are often invited down to read classified documents in the intelligence spaces so that they can be better informed on the decisions and the votes that are taking place on the House floor.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbray, your response?
Sure. I first want to add that I think that it's become such political rhetoric that Congress doesn't want to show up to work, and so they just blame things on the Senate. And I want to clarify something, too. I don't have top secret clearance now. I've had top secret clearance in the past. But I do believe that Congress has a right to understand and know what was going on. We saw with NSA, there was clearly a constitutional overreach, and members of Congress didn't even know that it was going on. I believe that they have the right to be informed, and we need to have that type of information to truly represent our constituencies.
Okay, Mr. Heck, you'll have the last word.
Well, those members who said they weren't informed never availed themselves of the opportunities to come down to the intelligence community spaces and read the documents that were made available to them in those committee spaces. Now remember, the people we're talking about in the intelligence community, these are not men and women who wake up every morning going to work with the intent of spying on Americans. These are the nameless, faceless individuals that keep this nation safe, that get up every morning and do the work necessary to protect this nation. No one in the intelligence community is going forward to try to spy intentionally on Americans, and if that happens inadvertently, the issues are dealt with quickly and appropriately through the appropriate channels.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for our questions. Now the candidates' closing statements. Erin Bilbray, you're once again first.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm delighted. It was a wonderful debate, and thank you very much, Joe. I think there is a clear contrast between myself and Congressman Heck on just about every issue. We've talked about I want to preserve Social Security and Medicare. I want to make sure that women and children have access to health care. I believe in equal pay for equal work. I believe in marriage equality. And I also believe that the government should not be spying on law-abiding citizens through their computers or through their telephones. I think we need someone in Congress that you will always know where they stand. You might not always agree with me, but when I take a position, I will be honest and forthright and not try to hide from votes that I've taken. So I'm delighted to be here, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Heck, your closing statement?
Thank you. Well, you know, we've heard a lot about the middle class throughout this campaign and tonight. You know, it's one thing to talk about the middle class, it's another thing to be from the middle class. You know, I grew up in a blue-collar, working-class family. My father started off as a grocery clerk, my mom was a homemaker. I didn't go to a private elementary school or secondary school. I didn't attend a private university. I am the product of the public school system, and as the first in my family to go to college, the proud graduate of a public university. I don't have a blind family trust. I worked my way through both college and medical school. I remember the pride my parents had when they saved up enough money for the down payment on our first home and moved our family out of the basement one-bedroom apartment that they were renting. And I also remember the disappointment they felt when they had to sell that home or risk losing it when my dad was out of work for several years, recovering from a workplace injury, and my mom had gone back to work. Like so many moms, she did an incredible job at juggling work, managing a household, raising 2 kids, and nursing my dad back to health. But through it all, my parents always taught us not to lament what we don't have, but to be thankful for what we do have. And one of the things we had was opportunity. My mom, who's the daughter of Italian immigrants, would always tell us that with hard work and determination, we could be anything we wanted to be because of the incredible opportunities this great nation provides. And that's why I think one of the most important parts of my job is to make sure that our children and grandchildren have the same, if not better, opportunities than we had. My mom was right. This kid from Queens, New York became a doctor, rose to the rank of brigadier general in the Army Reserve, and was elected to Congress. And so that's why I'm asking to be reelected, so that I can work hard every day to make sure that this generation and future generations have those opportunities, so that someday, with hard work and determination, their dreams can become realities. Thank you for watching, thank you for your support, and good night.
All right, that concludes our debate for Congressional District 3. We'd like to thank Democratic candidate Aaron Bilbray and Republican candidate Joe Heck for participating, and we'd like to thank you for watching. Please stay with us because the debate for Lieutenant Governor is coming up next right here on Vegas PBS.